before Shabbat, the pot of food before Shabbat was something that has the ability to add heat. That means if you wrap the pot, let's say you take a pot off a fire before Shabbat, and let's say you wrap it in some sort of item that adds heat, you wrap it on all four sides, good morning, that would be a problem because the rabbis are afraid you might come to wrap the pot with remets. Remets is like pieces of coal, ash, and the problem would be that maybe on Shabbat, if you wrap it with those coals, with those ashes, you'll actually stoke those pieces of coals on the Shabbat. And if you stoke them and you bring out a fire, that will be a problem of desecration of the Shabbat, of Mavir, of making a fire on Shabbat. So because of the concern that if people might go ahead and insulate a pot, if you use a thing that adds heat before Shabbat, we're afraid that people insulate it with the type of item that would be a problem of stoking. So the rabbi said, don't insulate with any item that will add heat. That's that's regarding that halacha. So now our Mishnah on 41a3 is going to talk about a little bit this subject. So let's see what the Mishnah has to state. The Mishnah states, Molir hagaruf. You have it, Adam? Molir hagaruf. If you have this, it's on we're on, in the art scroll, it's 41a2 on the bottom, Mishnah. Molir hagaruf. So this is a certain type of utensil that's used for heating water. And it has a large bowl, as they describe it. It's a large bowl, that has for the water, that the water is inside the bowl. And this large bowl, imagine this container that here's the water, and outside the bowl there is a compartment where they keep the coals, and the coals are heating up the water that's inside. So this type of item, if you went ahead and you removed the compartment that had the coals, which is outside this bowl, if you remove the coals before the Shabbat, you could go ahead and you could use this vessel, take water from it, leave water. You can leave water in this vessel from before Shabbat, and you could take water from this vessel, even though, and it's not a problem. We say, even though the way the vessel is made, it's made in a way that it's insulated. That's what it would seem. But since once you remove the coals, the heat that's in that compartment that you had the coals from before Shabbat, it's now only maintaining the heat of the water that's in that container. It's not adding heat to the water. So we said, if before Shabbat, if you have some sort of insulation of something, but it's not adding heat, it's only retaining the heat, keeping the heat, that's not a problem. Just like we said, good morning, Mark.
Morning,
Just,
Rabbi.
morning. Just like we said, if you have a towel, if before Shabbat, you could take the food, the soup pot before Shabbat and take it off the fire and wrap it in the towel, because the towel is not adding any heat. The towel is only maintaining the heat that's found in the pot. So that's this mulyur hagaruf, this type of container that the Mishnah is referring to. Then the Mishnah talks about an antichi. An antichi, the Gemara is going to explain exactly what is this antichi, but again, it's a type of utensil that has insulation. And if you remove the coals from this antichi, afa pisha grufa, even though you remove the coals before the Shabbat, so nevertheless, ein shotin hemena, you can't use it. You can't use this Now, this antichi contains water, hot water that you heated up before the Shabbat. You can't go ahead and use this container, this vessel on Shabbat to get water from, get your hot water, because this vessel is made in a way that it's a vessel, let's say within a vessel. It's being that it's a vessel in a vessel. There's some sort of there's an insulation aspect to this. See, a regular pot that you put on a fire before Shabbat, it's not, and you put on the blech, you put on that piece of metal. That pot is not doesn't have it's not wrapped in something. It's not insulated. It's not. There's another insulation. It's just a regular pot. That's not the issue. That's not a problem of insulation. But if you have a pot type of thing that's made like a pot within a pot, like two layers of a pot, so to speak, that would be an issue of insulation. And here and even when you remove the coals before the Shabbat, but the heat is so intense that it's still adding heat, a significant addition of heat, and therefore it falls under the category of you can't insulate food before Shabbat in an item that's adding heat. So
And I can't insulate on Shabbat either, right?
You cannot insulate on Shabbat even with something that doesn't add heat.
Right.
Even though it doesn't add heat. Right.
So I can't use the thermos. So I can't take something that was hot, heated before Shabbat, like in like one of those coffee urns. You know, those coffee urns that they use in the shul on Shabbat. We use them every day there. They use hot water from there all the time, every shul I go to. So I can't take hot water from there on Shabbat and put it into a thermos.
So that's different because that's not the original pot that was on the fire.
No, I'm not talking about on the fire.
No.
I'm talking about like wrapping food, wrapping the pot on Shabbat. You're not allowed to wrap a pot.
Right, you're not allowed to wrap the original pot on Shabbat, right? But what about if you take the contents?
This is like what is it called? Insulation. I'm not allowed to insulate the heat.
That's called hatmana. It's called hatmana. But Mark, your case is a case where you're taking the food from the original pot and you're taking it and you're putting it into a different receptacle, and that's how you're insulating. You're not insulating the original.
So I could take Kelishani, take the food from the hot pot, put it in the second pot, and then totally wrap it up top, bottom, side, everything.
That's what I would that's another homework for me, Mark. But that should be a difference between what we've been talking about here until now. We've been always talking about the original pot that was the Kli Rishon,
right?
Insulating that your case is a different case, and that might be different. That might be different. So we have to double check if that's true. That would be different because you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Kli Shani could be different, but it's not. Right. It's not the same. What you're talking about. You're talking about
the original
insulating a pot before Shabbat that adds heat, or insulating a pot on Shabbat that doesn't add heat.
Right, exactly. The original pot. We're talking about that, right? We're talking about the original pot. We're talking about the pot that was heated up with the water, right? That's the original pot. And this pot has a double wrap. It comes with a double pot within a pot, so to speak. So it's the original. It's the original pot. It's being insulated. So
I never heard of that.
So that's a different. That the Gemara is going to discuss what exactly to try to figure out what type of pot they're talking about that has this double.
We don't have such a pot today.
I'm not sure if we have these type of pots.
I never heard of it.
Maybe I don't think it's not. We don't use these pots. These are not the type of pots that we're generally using. So the Mishnah continues, but this type of antichi, which the Gemara, Rashi says, is going to explain to us what exactly is this type of pot. Excuse me, ein shotin himena. You can't use this pot to drink the hot water from on Shabbat, because this, even when you remove the coals, the heat is so intense that it's still adding heat on Shabbat to the water, and therefore it's similar to it's insulating. That means that you're like insulating before Shabbat with something that's adding heat. Because right. In contrast, if you like we said, if you take a pot before Shabbat, just wrap it in a towel. You're not add the towel is not there's no adding of heat, and that would not be a problem before Shabbat. On Shabbat itself, you wouldn't wrap the pot. You wouldn't take it off the fire on Shabbat and wrap it in the pot, even though the pot is not adding heat, because that's on Shabbat itself. Now, the Gemara now asks the question, Heichi Dami, the big question, Heichi Dami Mulyah HaGaruf. What is this Mulyah HaGaruf that we said that it's not a problem if you remove the coals? We have two cases in the Mishnah. We have the Mulyah HaGaruf, where we said it's not a problem if you move the coals before Shabbat. It's not adding heat. It's not adding anything of significance. And we have the case of the Antichi. So the Gemara says, the Mulyah HaGaruf is Tana, we learned in the Braita, is Mayim Bibifnim. Water is on the inside, and the coals are on the outside. And there is a water on the outside, that means there's some sort of area that's on the outside of the pot itself that has some sort of that's attached to the pot, and that's what's heating it up. And that type of being that the coals are outside the pot, it's not as intense, and therefore, if you remove those coals, the pot is not really the water that's contained in the pot. It's not really getting significantly warmer as a result of the fact that there was coals there before the Shabbat, and therefore the Mulyah HaGaruf, you could use this type of container on Shabbat to get water from, hot water. But Antichi, the Gemara says, what is this Antichi? So Rabbah said, is a Beikira. It's very similar to the Mulyah HaGaruf, which is it's like a box that has, good morning, it's a box, and it's like a square box that has this open, in the middle you have this round, let's say, pot, and you have it's like a stove with a compartment for water. So you have next to the coals, you have the water. So even though it's very similar, which you have two compartments, one compartment for water and another compartment next to it for coals, but the compartments of that tichi are divided. The water compartment and the coal compartment are divided by a thick wall, and the coal is burned in it the whole week long. And because coal is burnt in it the whole week long, the dividing wall becomes extremely hot. It retains its heat, and it actually adds heat to the water. Even after you remove the coals, because the wall is so intensely hot, it's going to add, and therefore, and being that this pot is somehow there's this two layers that in some way the pot itself is like insulated, and and therefore there'll be a problem of adding heat on that this pot is being insulated with something that's adding heat, even though the coals have been removed, right? Because what we've been learned, however, the other opinion says. The other opinion of Nachum Yitzchak about Beidodi. Beidodi is a double bottom pot. It's like let's say you have a pot within a pot, and you have the coals. Let's say you have the pot that's on top has the water inside. Underneath that, you have coals underneath that pot that contains the water, and underneath the coals is another pot. Pot, coals on top of it, pot with water inside. So the lower compartment, so we have the coals are in the lower compartment and the water is in the upper compartment. But since the lower compartment here is covered, right? the lower compartment's covered with the second pot that's right on top of it, that second whatever, however they made that pot, the heat is trapped in even after you remove the coals. So you remove the coals are on the bottom of pot number one, let's say, and then then you have the pot number. So even though you remove the coals, but it still remains hot and it continues to heat the water. So that's what the Gemara says regarding these there's different opinions exactly what exactly is this antichi. So the Gemara says, now the Gemara says the following. Man di Ama Beidode. The one that says that the pot that we're talking about when the Mishnah says antichi is no good, the antichi is no good, kol shekain beikire. That if the antiche is considered that it gives enough heat, this beidodi, meaning the case that we just said, the pot within the pot, if that's the problem, kol shekain beikiri. The Gemara understands that the beikiri, that thing when it had the compartments side by side, but that wall, there was a thick wall and the coals were there the whole week. They understand that's definitely stronger than the other pot, the other contraption. And therefore, if the beidodi is the problem, so certainly the beikiri is considered significant enough heat that we have to be worried about. But Umandi Omar, however, the one who says that it's the beikiri, the one who says that the antichi that the Mishnah states that is a problem is the one that has that thick wall in between that they kept the coals in the whole week. And that's the case the Mishnah says that even though you remove the coals, morning Asaf, even though you remove the coals, it's still a problem. But the fact that you're telling me, meaning the Gemara understands that has more heat than the other one, right? We have, good morning, Mark. We have this beikiri and we have this beidodi. One of them has more heat than the other. That's not a question. The one that has the thick wall in between, the Gemara understands gives off more heat. Now, if you're telling me that the problem of the Mishnah is only one that is the pot that has the more heat, which we seem to indicate that the pot that gives the less heat would not be a problem. If you tell me the pot that gives it the less heat is a problem, then certainly the pot that has the more heat is the problem, right? So that's what the Gemara is saying over here. If you say that the beidodi is a problem, the pot, like the way we explained, the pot inside a pot is a problem. Kol shekain beikiri. Certainly, when the beikiri, when they are side by side and it has that thick wall, and they keep coals in there the whole week, and that wall is definitely burning hot, that will be a problem. But man diyama beikiri, the one who says beikiri is a problem of a beidodi low. The beidodi that doesn't have as much heat as that thick wall, then it would not be a problem. Once you remove the coals, you'll be able to use it on Shabbat. The Gemara says, Tanya Kavotei de Rav Nachman. We learned by Rav Nachman, which was like the more strict opinion, that even the beidodi, which is pot within a pot type of contraption, which does not have the same amount of heat as having the compartments wall by wall, that's still considered enough heat that we will say it's adding enough heat on Shabbat, that you're going to say you can't, that's what's considered a level of insulation with something that adds heat. Tanya goes to the Rav Nachman, Antichi af al pi sheglufa ketuma. Even though you removed the coals or you covered the coals, you cannot use it on Shabbat. You can't use it to drink water because the bottom is keeping it hot. It's warming it up. What? Continues to heat the water, exactly. And since it continues to heat the water, it's called that it's added heat. So we see the fact that we're saying it's the bottom, it's not a side-by-side contraption. So that's the Bedodi contraption. It's not the contraption that has that thick wall in between, and yet it's still a problem. Okay. Now the next Mishnah. Hamecham shepinuhu. So you have this hot water, let's say tea kettle, right? Shepinu, you removed it. Now, what does shepinu means? Doesn't mean you remove the water from the tea kettle. Doesn't mean you just remove the tea kettle itself with the water inside. That's gonna. Rashi says the whole Mishnah will be explained in the Gemara. What does it mean? It was cleared. It was cleared from the fire. It was cleared from its water. So we have a kettle. Shepinuhu. So there's something happened. Again, two possibilities we're saying. Either the water was removed or the kettle was removed from the fire. Lo yitin l'tochot sonein. You can't put cold water into this kettle. Why? Because you're heating, if you want to heat it up, you want to heat the water, you're going to go ahead and you're cooking the water. So there's two possibilities. Either we're saying if there's water. Right, so we're saying that here we had, if there's hot water still in the kettle, right? You remove the kettle from the fire, it's still a kli rishon, because even though it's off the fire, but it's still boiling, so you can't put cold water into that utensil because you're actually cooking the cold water. That's one way of learning. Or after you empty the contents of the kettle, the walls of the kettle are still hot. So if you put water in it, you're going to actually be cooking the water, right? So you can't, so the Mishnah states, don't put cold water in that, whatever the case we'll be talking about. Mark wrote the Mishnah. Avol mayim l'tocho. So now the Gemara is going to, but now the Mishnah states, you could put water into it. Now that seems a contradiction. You told me a moment ago, you can't put cold water into this tea kettle, right? And now you're telling me you could cook. So that's what the Gemara is going to have to explain, right? As it seems like an apparent direct contradiction. That's why Rashi says, everybody relax. The whole Mishnah will be explained in the Gemara, right? Why does Rashi do that, Adam? Because it's an obvious question. When it's an obvious question, Rashi says, if everything will be explained. Noting who l'tocho, but then here's Mark's case. Oh, l'tocha kos. Or you could put the water, or you could put the cold water into the cup. Meaning, if you poured from the kettle into a cup, that's what it would sound like. If you poured from the kettle into a cup, then you could avol notein l'tocha kos, because the cup is kli sheni, right? Mark's point. You poured from the kettle into the cup, and then you add the cold water. No problem. Right. Now we said, when we spoke about the tea, we said tea leaves might be something that cooks easily. And because it might become cooked easily, we don't put tea leaves in a kli sheni. However, water is not such an easy thing. Water takes a lot of time to cook, and therefore water is something which is not easy to cook, and therefore you could put the cold water into the kli sheni. It's certain, but we say that the walls of each utensil is cooling it off a little bit. Right, but it's still not the same. But we still consider it. Maybe it's not the same level of cooking. It's not considered a cooking that's a problem, because the walls of each one cools off a certain amount. So now of the tochen, it's a hard thing. I don't think not everyone buys it, Mark. Some people say it's a problem. Some people do say that if it's still when you put into the cup that kli shlishi, it's still boiling hot. You shouldn't put in the tea leaves. But many are lenient. So, want to say it again? Everybody does it, right? That's the common. But you put the leaf in the second cup, right? But that's the kli shlishi. So the Gemara says, "Olatocha kos kedei lahafshir." Which case? It's that's going to be the Gemara's question. When it says you could place it into the kettle, that's going to be the Gemara's question. How could you place it into the kettle? The cup we get, but we don't get the kettle, right? So that's what the Gemara is gonna explain in a moment. Now the Gemara, that's the Gemara's question. My kama, what is the Mishnah saying? If you look at the last Rashi on the page, my pinu. Look how Rashi translates. What's the Gemara's question, right? You have the last Rashi on the page. Got it? Gemara, right? See the last Rashi, last line of the page, Ezra? Last line of the page in the Hebrew. My kama, my pinu. In the right. What does it mean? What does it mean? You remove? What did you remove? The kettle from the fire, the water from the kettle. Umay lo yitain. What you said you shouldn't place cold water. The never had nothing. Then you said you could place. So what's going on? So comes the Gemara. My kama. Amar Ravada bar Matna. Ravada bar Matna says, Hachi kama. This is what it means. Hamecham shepina mimenu hamayim achamim. If you had the tea kettle and you emptied out the hot water from the tea kettle, right? You emptied out the contents of the tea kettle, and now you have no water left in the tea kettle. Don't put a small amount of cold water in it. That the cold water should heat up. Because if you put a small amount of cold water in it, that water will heat up, will cook. But what about if you're going to put a big batch if you're throwing a lot of cold water into this tea kettle, it's not going to cook that water if you put a lot. You put a 30 ounces, 32 ounces of water into this tea kettle. You put a little bit, it'll cook it. Of a mayim. Right, so maybe it will, but it won't. It won't cook it. Right, so that you could do to warm. That's what the Gemara says. That since it doesn't have the ability to cook it, it will warm it. That's fine. Warming is not cooking, right? If you're not getting right, warming is not cooking. Even though we spoke about we don't want to do something, we don't do something, an act that has the ability. Like remember we spoke about, right? That will take that on the blood and say, okay, I'm just going to warm. Right, that you can't do because if you leave it there, it will cook it, right? But here we're talking about when you pour this amount of water in, it's not going to cook it. It's not going to get cooked. It's never going to reach the level of cooking. So that it's even though you're getting, what are you gaining? You're gaining, like you said, you're warming it, but it's nowhere near boiling the water that you're putting in. So therefore, you can place a lot of water. In order to warm it up a little bit. Now, so that's how we explain the Mishnah. Now, so the Gemara, now we're turning the page. The Gemara says, but okay, you explained the Mishnah, but you have a different issue. If you have a pot that's boiling hot, right? Because you had the water that was in the pot, and then you empty the contents on Shabbat of the water, or even if you didn't empty it on Shabbat, you emptied it before Shabbat. But if on Shabbat you're putting in the cold water, you spoke about the pores before about by putting cold into hot. It's something when a pot is boiling hot, many times the pot is it's malleable, if that's the right word. And by you going ahead and putting in the cold water, now you're closing the pores. So you're making the pot into a utensil, so to speak, meaning you're fixing it. It's a type of fixing. Like look at Rashi. Rashi says, "Halo mitzaref." When metal is hot and you put it in cold, it strengthens the pot, and that's called. Then that is considered when they make a pot. When that's how they finish it, because the heat softens it. Red hot, and they shape it to what they want. They stick it in cold water right away. They keep right, and this pot, as once it's boiling hot, it has the pots were not made the same way we make pots today. It's close to breaking. Rashi says it has because of the heat that softened it up, and the water makes it, gives it the strength. So now how could you go ahead on Shabbat, throw this a lot? You tell me put a lot of cold water into this pot. You could do it. You want to warm the cold water, but you are doing some other issue. Good, you're not cooking on Shabbat, but you're fixing the utensil. That's the Gemara's question. Fascinating, right? Right? I think the plate, in Israel, there's a silver called Sarfim, right? The company, Sarfim, I think. That's the same word. It's making the utensils. Good morning. 7:30 service upstairs. Welcome. So the Gemara says, you know what? The Gemara says, the author of, now, what I would say is, it's not definite, not all the time that you cook something in this pot and you cook the heat kettle and you throw out, empty the contents. If you don't throw the cold water in, it's automatically going to break, and automatically you're finishing the utensil. But there are times, right? There's a certain amount of times that this will make or break, excuse the pun, right? Make or break the utensil. Certain times, even if you wouldn't throw in the cold water, it's fine. But the Gemara's question is, the Gemara's going to answer, since it's not a psik ratio, it's not always that you're fixed this act. This act's not always considered that you made it, right? This act, maybe sometimes you didn't need this act. Let's say the utensil was strong enough that even if you would not have thrown it in, it would have been all right. So, but the fact, so that's what it's from Shimon. Rav Shimon holds in Shabbat, when you do an act and you're not intending to for that purpose, right? Why is the guy throwing the water into this thing? He wants to. Is he doing what Mark said, that when they stick that iron in the water, they're sticking the iron in the water to strengthen the utensil, that it should not. That's the intention over there. They are there to finish, to make sure that it's strong. But here I'm not thinking about it. I'm thinking about, I want my water warm. I want warm water. Therefore, and it's not definite. That's why I want to throw in that. But it's not definite. See, even if you're not thinking it, but if it's automatic, you can't say, okay, I wasn't thinking about that. But you're doing it. You're doing the act. But if it's not definite that you're doing the act, right? Like the story, if a guy goes down on Shabbat, if you take a bed and you drag it outside in the dirt floors, you want to get from point A to point B. Not because I want to make a groove in the ground easy by plowing. I'm not intending for plowing. So we say, if it's not definite, I'm making a groove, even though sometimes I might make a groove, that it's not a problem. Yes, Mark.
So you said when you take the hot kettle with hot water in it, you're not allowed to add any cold water in it because you're cooking the water you add.
Right. Especially if you can add a little bit of water, you definitely. But now we have to see if you throw in a lot of water, that we'll see. Because maybe you could throw in, we'll see. If you throw,
thing is, put a little bit of water, or that was exactly where I was going. Because you could take an empty hot kettle, don't put a lot, put a little. So
wait. You said empty hot kettle. You can't put a little, put a lot.
And if you want a kettle with water,
so you would say maybe the same thing. Put in a lot of water. That's the next opinion in the Gemara. Mark, I told you, Mark wrote the Gemara today. Right, that's the next piece in the Gemara. It should be the same idea. I should be able to that, right? He's saying if you could take a kettle, Mark is saying, and empty the contents of the kettle, and then throw in a lot of cold water, because it's not going to get cooked, because you're putting a lot of cold water into the empty kettle. It's just warming. So too.
Kettle with water in it, and I put a lot of water in it.
Should be okay.
You're
doing the same thing, right? Exactly. That's going to be, by the way, the other approach in the Gemara, meaning there's going to be another rabbi who's going to say that's what the Mishnah is talking about. Not that the Mishnah is talking about you empty the contents of the kettle. Rather, you didn't empty the contents of the kettle. But the Mishnah is saying is you can't put a little bit of water into that water, but you can put a lot of water. Right, exactly. And that's what Abaye challenges. Maskefla Abaye. Right, 141b. Masma Baye. What if the Mishnah midei mecham shapinu mena mayim kitani? The Mishnah didn't say the kettle that you emptied the water from the kettle. The Mishnah just said the kettle that was cleared. So maybe it just means that the kettle was removed from the fire, but not that the contents was removed. If you're talking about the contents of the water was removed from the kettle, it should have said the kettle that you removed the water. And therefore, Abaye is challenging the approach of the previous rabbi in understanding the case of the Mishnah. So he's challenging that. It's only talking about a kettle that you remove from the fire. And therefore it still has the water. Elam Abaye hachikama. Abaye says, this is what the Mishnah, this is the case. It's not emptied, just cleared, cleared from the fire. Different third, different case. His meaning, because he's taken the Mishnah. The Mishnah did not use the word water. The Mishnah only used the word you removed it. You cleared it. And therefore that's what he's going to say, exactly what we just said. You can't put a little bit of water, you could put in a lot of water. Okay, we'll see tomorrow. 1, 2, 3. Look how the time goes. You think we just started? And I always say, time flies when you're having fun. Okay, have a great day, everybody. That's why people have to enjoy work. If you don't enjoy work, that's why rabbis say you have to love work. But if you don't love work, people are not going to be working. And they're not going to be able to do what they need to do in life. Have a great day, everybody.